Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's Biz Essentials webinar. We're going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to leave this open and just hold on as we get some more people joining us over the next few minutes. So just hang on for a tiny bit. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello again, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Amy Stark, Director of Administration for FCSI the Americas, and we're excited to have you here this month. I have a couple announcements again before we get started. Please use the Q&A feature on your screen to submit questions for Kathleen. If you miss anything on today's webinar or want to rewatch this episode again or any of our previous episodes, don't forget they're recorded and available on the FCSI America's website or on our YouTube channel. So go ahead and subscribe to YouTube or visit our website. And now I'd like to go ahead and welcome today's speaker, who most of you probably know again. Kathleen Held is CEO and President of Cini-Little. She's a certified public service marketer with 25 years of experience. So welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Amy. I'm excited to be back and presenting on one of my favorite topics, which is proposals. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop my camera because I always get distracted by that. And let's begin. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things today on this session. Once you get through how to read a proposal, getting into how to respond to one, there are so many different pieces of this puzzle that we're going to talk about, what's in your proposal toolbox, the different types of proposals that food service consultants typically respond to. What exactly is a proposal planning process? How do consultants get selected by the architects to be on their team? We're going to talk about how that data is integrated into the bigger architectural proposal. Actually get into the meat of a proposal response, talk a little bit about writing and graphics. And then when we get shortlisted, obviously there's the big interview and then the debrief. So I presented this on the last call, and I always like to come back to it, especially when we're talking about RFPs and trying to interpret exactly what it is the client is asking of us in the RFP and how we're going to respond. Obviously when you read the material, what their explanation is and what the reality is could be completely different. Not only that, but the other people responding to the RFP could have completely different interpretations of what it is that you're actually responding to. So let's talk a little bit about the proposal toolbox. So before you even begin working on your proposal, it's always good to have a toolbox of what you are prepared to utilize once you're writing your proposals. So what's in your toolbox? One of the critical elements of your toolbox is actually having brand guidelines for how to utilize your logo in a document. Not only that, but usually firms have fonts, font sizes, color palettes that they utilize in their marketing materials. And it's a good idea to have all of this information and understanding of how they're utilized in your materials before you begin to respond to your proposal. The last thing you want is having your proposal out there and having it look different from other ones that you have sent out previously. You want to look like one company responding. And yes, you can get creative in your response, but you're always going to want to look like it came from the same company by using common fonts, palettes, and logo guidelines. It's always good to have templates for all of the materials that you're using for your response. So for your CVs, project sheets, company profile, it's always good to have templates already pre-made so that you can easily respond to your proposal calls using those templates. Electronic filing system. So what I think of an electronic filing system, not only is it one place to easily access all of your proposal information as far as resumes, data sheets, etc., but it's also a bunch of canned responses that you've utilized in the past that may be asked on this RFP. You don't want to have to go looking through older proposals looking for the last time you responded to that information. So it's always good to have an electronic filing system of those canned text items that you can use to respond to. The other thing you should have in your proposal toolbox is really a reliable CRM system. Whether it's sophisticated or simple, you need a way to track which opportunities you're responding to, when you sent them, and what the results of them are, so that you can use this when you're thinking about marketing intelligence for future proposal responses. So we need to talk a little bit quickly about the different types of proposals that food service consultants typically respond to, and how we approach responding to them. So as food service consultants, we typically respond to what I'll put into 3 different buckets of proposals. The most common one is one where we're asked to propose with an architectural team, and we're not the quote unquote prime on that. We're just one of the many sub-consultants the architect is utilizing on their team for our particular specialty. The second bucket is actually when we're competitively bidding against each other, and a project management firm or an end user is actually put a proposal out to bid. And the third bucket is when the architect is actually using a competitive bid system to outfit their team for a proposal or a project that they've already won. So let's talk about the proposal planning process. And by process, I really mean once you have the proposal in-house, you know, we talked about last month, about go or no-go decisions on responding to it. So we're at the point now where we've decided that we're actually responding to the proposal. So having a formal or informal process is really important. So on a more formal proposal where you have to put a lot of data together over a short period of time, or even a long period of time, the people that you need to work with you on that, plus you know, internal people that you're working with or external sub-consultants, all kind of need to know the time frame that you're using to respond to that proposal and the who's doing what, the wins, etc. We're all busy doing other things, whether it's responding to other proposals, working on projects, taking vacations, time out of the office for project meetings. So everybody really needs to be on the same page. So this is just an example of one way of doing a proposal process. Clearly, the due date's over here, and then they kind of backed into it and who's doing what and what to when. This is another example of a process. And this is basically a process that identifies, you know, once they decide they get the proposal into the company, how the proposal kind of flows through the different areas to final completion and post-proposal. Again, this is a process so that everyone in your company is on the same page as to what happens once the proposal comes in and who's responsible for what and what each stage of the proposal looks like. Another process is simply making sure everybody in the company is on the same page as far as what happens when the proposal comes in and who's responsible for what. So for example, this says, you know, person A, B, and C are all responsible for reading the proposal. Person A is responsible for the go, no-go decision. Person B is responsible for the fees. Again, it's just to make sure that it's clear as to who's responsible for what and when it's due, etc. Why is the process important? This is my herding cats photo. I don't know how it is in your company, but sometimes it could be like herding cats if you're working with multiple sub-consultants or multiple people on a submission. And having a process in place and making sure everyone's on the same page makes the RFP response much easier. So when we think about the first bucket I talked about, which is when you're on an architectural team for a proposal bid, let's talk about how the architects select a consultant to be on their team. So they're looking for people they have a relationship with, that they've have experience working on other projects with, that you have experience working on this specific project type with this specific project. They're kind of thinking about what experience you have working with some of their other teaming members and how that kind of matrixes together to show a common theme of experience. If the RFP has specific requirements regarding small, women, minority businesses, they're also looking to find a teaming partner that has that experience to fill out the card that they need to meet the requirements. Where are they looking? Obviously, their first place they're looking is to see who they have existing relationships with. It's really critically important in an architectural relationship when you're working with an architect on a proposal and they're putting together, you know, who their team is. They want to work with people they've worked with in the past and who they have experience working with. They're not going to want to try out a new relationship on a project if they can get away with it. As I've heard a end user client say, nobody really wants to be the guinea pig to see if that relationship is going to work. So if you're responding to a data call from an architect to be on their team for a proposal, you need to follow the directions that are given to you. They may be asking for specific material, such as a specific number of resumes or a specific number of projects. And they may or may not be putting that material in as you send it to them. So you might want to think about where your logo is on that material and if your company name's on that material. So you're going to present that material in a different way than you would if you put it into a formal proposal. You're also going to want to make sure you have the conversation with the architect that you're working with to see how they want it formatted. Sometimes they want you to use their templates. Sometimes they tell you to send it in the format that you typically use and they're going to reformat it. Sometimes they want it in Word, sometimes they don't. You need to have those conversations because our goal is always to make their job easier. When you're writing about you know, your firm overview or providing them content to put into their proposals, make sure you're writing about this project and you're not using canned material that you haven't cleansed for references to other projects. When you're using your CVs, make sure that you're using CV titles that are relevant to the work that you're doing on this project and not your corporate titles that you use internally. So you're going to want to say, you know, you're the food service project executive versus president or CEO of your company. This is an example data call from an architect to a consultant. It tells you when they need the materials. You know, they're very specific about which kind of template they want to use when they sent it to you. They've asked for a logo. They might even ask you for your logo in a specific way. They've asked for a salary table. So again, it's important to read this thoroughly, make sure that you respond in a timely fashion, and send them only the materials they've asked for. And why do you want to only send them the materials they've asked for? Oftentimes, I think consultants fall into the habit of sending people everything under the sun and saying, oh, they'll just figure out what they need. The problem is that if you're working on a big architectural team for a large submission, they're working with a lot of sub-consultants to try to pull in the same information, and they don't have time to weed through your materials to figure out exactly what it is that they asked you to send when you sent too much information. Here's just some examples of how architectural teams pull in sub-consultants' information into their greater proposal. You know, they're pulling in your firm overview and adding it potentially to a page with other teams' firm overviews. You know, they might be doing a chart matrix showing how your team kind of fits into the project and what your classifications and certifications are. You know, this is an example of another matrix where they're kind of matrixing together which pieces of the team have worked together on which projects. And then this is just another example of other materials that architects have utilized where sub-consultants involved. You can see this team over here did a great job of talking how they worked together with, you know, Perkins and Will on other projects. Again, it's bringing in specific experience that you've worked with them on and making sure that you're providing them easy to read and easy to incorporate material about your firm. So the proposal response. So when you're not in an architectural situation where you're responding to an architect who's then taking your material and putting it into the greater project, you need to respond to it on your own. So how do you do that? Well, the basics are know the formats of your response. So in the RFP, sometimes they're very specific about how they want your proposal formatted. They might give you in a specific order of the material that they want in there and have the specific sections laid out for you. And if they don't, that's fine. You can utilize whatever your standard template is. It is critical that you organize your response based on the structure spelled out in the RFP. It's also critically important that you follow the instructions, make sure you've responded to everything they've asked for. And that includes if they ask for it 7 times, put it in there 7 times. Because sometimes they might skip sections and they're looking for a specific answer that they asked for in a section. And if you've not responded to it, that could be a problem. It's always important to remember bigger isn't better. So what does that mean? That means you don't have to have a big fat proposal for it to be the best proposal. The best proposal is the one that answers the RFP the most clearly and with the most relevant information. It's also important to have a timely response. You can't be responding to an RFP late. So what's your proposal strategy? What do clients want? Obviously, they're looking for innovative solutions. Are you creative? Can you approach their problem in such a way that it's going to provide innovative solutions to their problem, whatever it is? They're looking at your team qualifications. Do you have recent relevant experience in the specific area that they're seeking? They want to see that your technical expertise matches what they're looking for. They want to see fiscal responsibility. Sometimes you'll have requests that want to make sure that your firm isn't a firm that just started and that you have a history of being in business for a while. They also want to make sure that you have strong references. It's always really good to make sure that you follow up on your references regularly and that you're not putting references into your proposals that are outdated. So how do you approach responding to a proposal? Do you just slap together a bunch of material into a proposal? Sometimes that works. Sometimes you can utilize a theme. So a theme could be like a reoccurring thought that you use throughout your proposal. It could be how you have certain strengths of your firm. It could be the geographic location of your firm. It could be a unique service that you provide. It could be your past experience with the client. The point is that you take that theme, and it could be actually multiple themes that you use to weave through your proposal to help pull it all together. Another way to approach writing a proposal is actually what you call the storyboarding method. So the storyboarding method is actually, kind of pulled from, writing cartoons or movie makers and how they storyboard a theme to a movie or a television show. And that's where you kind of come up with an idea that you want to use for your entire proposal. A lot of people like using the storyboard method because it helps pull together your response in a nice, easy package. It kind of prevents the forest through the trees problem where you're focusing on the wrong information. It helps to promote consistency throughout the proposal. It allows you to visually tie together all of the visual elements of your proposal into the story that you're trying to tell as well. A lot of people like to use the storyboarding method, especially if there's page limits in the RFP requirements. One of the things that you have to remember as you're responding to a proposal is that they're legally binding documents, that whatever you put into that proposal often ends up into the final contract if you're awarded that project. So you need to make sure that you're very careful with how you tell them that what services you're providing, your insurance requirements, the people working on the projects. Again, all of that gets put into the final contract. And if it's things that you cannot be legally bound to or are incorrect, that could be problems down the road. So the quality of your response does affect your selection. It's important that your response is customized to that particular RFP. Nobody wants to see the same proposal that you send to all your clients sent to them. It doesn't make them feel special. It doesn't make them feel important, and it makes them feel like you are just, doing a data call and sending out the same information to them. You need to make sure your response is complete, that you've literally answered every question in the RFP. I mentioned on our last call, sometimes when you're reading the RFP, there's Easter eggs in there where they ask you for information in different places, and you need to make sure you pick up on that and include it in your RFP response. Again, making sure that you submit your proposal on time. We talked about last time, making sure that you understand how your proposal is supposed to be submitted. So are you supposed to email it? Are you supposed to upload it to a website? Do you have to actually physically send out hard copies? You need to know all this so that you can back into the proposal due date to make sure you give yourself plenty of time to respond. And you need to make sure that in your response that you sound knowledgeable of the topics that you're talking about. So why do proposals fail? Well, obviously, other than the fact that your proposal fee was the highest or the lowest, or what other requirements that are in that area, proposals fail because you just fail to address the requirements of the proposal. If they've asked for your proposal in a specific format and you just give them your typical proposal, that's not going to fly. If they've asked for specific qualification materials that include resumes and project data sheets and references, and you send them a letter proposal, again, that's not going to work. All of that falls into a failure to follow the directions. If you don't have the experience, or you don't demonstrate that you do have the experience in your proposal response, that's also a failure. If the proposal team that you put forth doesn't have the experience, or you fail to demonstrate their experience, that's a failure. If you don't leave yourself enough time to actually put together a thoughtful proposal response, and you throw something together in the end, that's a failure. And simply not listening to what the client needs, wants, and their goals is also a failure. Keep in mind that oftentimes people think or forget, really, that the time that you take to respond to proposals is money that your firm is spending, whether it's the time to research the RFP and the client, the time that you spent to pull together the proposal package. All of that is money out of your firm's pocket. So you want to be able to use the time in responding to the proposal carefully and thoughtfully. Writing and graphics. So when you're putting together your proposal content, you want to make sure that your writing is active and friendly in its style. You really actually want to make your proposal easy and enjoyable to read. You don't want to get caught up in too technical of jargon or use terms that your client simply doesn't understand. You also want to make sure that you edit for uniformality, especially if you have multiple people working on sections of the proposal or you're pulling information from multiple places, that you want to make sure that it's uniform in how it sounds and that the writing styles are similar in tone and style. Often people wait to the last possible minute to write their cover letter, and really the cover letter should be the one piece that you spend the most amount of time on, because if you think about it, the people responding to the proposal or reading the proposals could be busy, and what if they only read your cover letter and fee page? What does your cover letter convey about your knowledge of the project and your team's experience? Again, on writing, you should try to focus on using present terms and action and active verbs. You want to try to eliminate the unnecessary words in your response. Again, long-winded sentences and fluffy words don't help you with your response. It could potentially cloud what the reader is reading about your firm. Replace the complicated words with simpler words. And use bullets as much as possible. People's time is valuable and they don't want to have to spend a lot of time trying to read your proposal to understand what you're trying to tell them. So if you can send that same message to them in a simpler format, it is better. And this is just an example of some designer babble. The new business school campus is characterized by a monumental scale incompatible with the context of the surrounding built environment. That very complex sentence could be written in a much easier way by saying the new business school is out of scale with its neighbors. Thinking about layout, you want to try to use a very sophisticated and professional layout. A lot of firms use InDesign, or even Word has if you know how to use it, can be used to break up your bits of information into an easier to read format, so it's not just straight text on a page. You want to try to utilize subheadings and headings and bold and italic fonts, and you want to emphasize certain parts of your paragraphs to show that it's important. Looking at this particular page, you can see that they've got a fair amount of information on there. It's very easy to read. They've used a unified font format, and they've just, changed how they use the font to convey different parts of the text. This can actually go and backfire on you if you use too many colors or too many different fonts. It goes from looking clean and sophisticated to looking cluttered very quickly. Graphics. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how to convey a lot of information in a very simple format, and graphics are a great way to do this. You can take a data-intense page, and by using graphics to simplify the information, it cleans it up and sends the message in a much easier to read format. So you can use graphs, you can use pie charts, line charts. There's lots of creative ways, including infographics, to convey a lot of information in a much easier to digest format. When you're thinking about resumes and CVs, again, make sure that the titles that you're using convey their titles on the project and not necessarily the corporate titles. You want to make sure that you're listing relevant work, that when you talk about the people working on the project, it's relevant to that particular project. If you've been asked for the resume in a specific format, you want to make sure that you're complying and sending that information back to them in the format requested. And again, you can see, this is an example of an incredibly data-heavy resume but it's on there in such a way that it's easy to read the information and pick out the different elements. When you're thinking about, project sheets or case studies, make sure that you're using high quality relevant images. Quick facts highlight challenges and outcomes. This is an example of 2 different ways to convey project information. Obviously, this is the SF330, and this is just a regular data sheet. They have a lot of information on there broken up in different ways, but it makes it very easy to read. So now that you've submitted your proposal, you've made it to the interview. So now what? Well, one of the first things you need to do is you probably should go back and reread the RFP and reread your proposal so that you're familiar with what you submitted and what they've asked for. You're going to want to think about who you're sending to the interview and come up with a strategy for how you're going to present. You're also going to want to carefully analyze the information they gave to you as far as what they wanted to hear about in the interview, and think about how that works into your presentation. And then you're going to want to rehearse and choreograph how you're going to respond. So thinking about the agenda and who's going to be there, you're going to want to present information that shows that you're of value to the client, that highlights your firm in such a way that shows your expertise and that you are the clear winner of the person that they should be working with ultimately in the end. When you think about who's going to be presenting for your firm, you need to make sure that the people presenting are actually the people who are going to be working ultimately with the client in the end. It's not typically in your best interest to send somebody who only does business development, because at the end of the day, it is likely that you are not going to be working on the project with them. You're not going to necessarily want to send the project executive if they're only the face of the company, and again, won't be there day to day working through the project with them. Sometimes the interview is really a chemistry test to see if they can really work together. When you're putting together your interview and the content of your presentation, you're going to want to have to carefully think about who's presenting what sections and to wait the time that they speak. You want everybody that's going to be there actually presenting and speaking so that there's a reason for them being in the room. And you don't want to use too many presenters. Visual aids, you're going to want to have a slide deck. Typically the fewer words, the better, the more imagery, the better. And a standard rule of thumb industry-wide is 1 minute per slide, unless you're me, and I tend to talk a lot faster than most people. And then you have to keep that in mind as well. So, the do's and don'ts of presentations, you absolutely don't want to wait till the last second to put together a presentation. You do want to practice. Oftentimes we don't think we need to do that because we've done it 100 times, but it's really important that you take the time to go through the presentation and practice timing, practice working with the other people, know how to work with each other and in tandem in an interview process. It's always a good idea to wear name tags when you go into the room because they don't always know who you are, and you don't want them having to try to remember. It's always also a good idea to try to anticipate what questions might be asked of you so that you can think of responses beforehand and be prepared. Some of the don'ts is don't let your presentation team outnumber the selection panel. Oftentimes they'll tell you who will be on their end in the interview room, and you need to make sure that you're not putting more people in the room than they have. Now that we're kind of doing a lot of things over, video conferencing, you need to also keep that into consideration. How many bubbles on the screen are you going to have versus them? You never really want to debate or argue appoints with the client. The client is always right in theory, especially in interview. You don't want to use overly complicated AV material or setup. You know, think about the people that you're sending into this interview. Do they understand how to set up the computer and pull up the presentation and work through the slides? You definitely don't want to use them as a guinea pig on materials or AV setup that they've never utilized. The last thing you want is in the middle of the presentation to somehow lose the presentation or them not even be able to pull it up on their computer to begin with. And never use a live website in your presentation. It's also best to bring your presentation with you, not only on your computer laptop as a copy on your file on your laptop, but also bring it on an external drive in case something happens to your laptop or they decide to have you use their equipment. Never talk down to your audience. Although you are the expert, they should never feel like you're putting them down. And always have a leave behind to leave when you leave as a reminder of the presentation that you gave. I personally never like to give out a copy of my slide deck at the beginning of the presentation because I always feel like it draws their attention away from what we're presenting and they're looking down at the papers in front of them. The debrief. So whether you win or lose, it's important to get feedback on your proposal every time. We often only ask for a debrief when we lose a proposal, but it's always great to get debriefs from even when you win. So what kind of questions would you ask in a debrief process? Well, you might want to ask, how could we improve our proposal? Or what positions the winning firm differently than ours? In some public bid environments, the winning proposal is actually in public domain, and you can ask for a copy of the proposal. Sometimes this actually has to be a written process where you write in and request it, but if that is something you want to see in a public bid forum, you can absolutely ask to see the winning proposal. You can always ask and see who was awarded the project as well. They may or may not tell you that information, especially if it's the debrief is immediately after you find out that you were not awarded the process. They might still be in contract negotiations with the winning team. In private bids, they often honestly don't even tell you that information, and they're not obligated to. So after you get feedback from the client on whether or not you won or lost the proposal, you're going to want to kind of brainstorm to see what you could have done differently and how you might approach the RFP process differently going forward and what changes to your materials that you can do to help better position yourself in the future. I often suggest that the project manager who was involved with the proposal maybe not be the best person to do the debrief. Sometimes you get more honest feedback when you have somebody else in your company, whether it be the CEO or the marketing person, actually reach out and ask for that debrief. Especially if it's an interview, you might get feedback that the person that at the interview wasn't, the chemistry didn't work out well, or something that you could bring back to your team, and they might not provide that same information if the person that they had an issue with is the one asking the question. And then you're going to want to record whatever information you get back into your CRM system so that you can utilize that in your next RFP response as a reminder of what you did well and didn't do well. If you get rejected too many times by the same clients, you might want to consider adding that to your go, no-go process as a potential that you don't want to pursue any future opportunities with that client. Again, every time you put money into responding to a proposal, it is firm money that you're using in that response. So you want to make sure you're using your firm dollars wisely. The other thing that I like to do when I am able to is actually to do a proposal swap. I belong to SMPS, and some of the chapters actually have a formal proposal swap, if you remember, that you can take your proposal to and get constructive feedback. I've also been at the AIA conference with a booth run by SMPS, where architects actually bring in their materials and bring them to an SMPS member and ask them to give them constructive criticism on their materials. What's really nice about this kind of process is that it's really good to get a fresh set of eyes to look at your materials. Oftentimes, when you're looking at something and proofing something, you don't see what's obvious to somebody who's outside looking in. In fact, if this is something you're interested in, please reach out to Amy. I'd be more than happy to coordinate with Amy if anyone wants to do a proposal swap to get constructive feedback on your proposals. It can either be done by myself, in which you'd have to make sure you tell Amy that's okay, or I have a lot of marketing friends in the industry that I can reach out to and also have look at your proposals if you're interested in that. Again, just reach out to Amy and let her know. And that's the end, Amy, if you'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay. Yeah, so we've had several, and I will just start with the first one that we received. So the first question we had was, you said it's okay to be creative when responding to an RFP, but in your opinion, what makes a proposal really pop or stick out from the rest?
Obviously, it's using really top-notch graphics. It's the ability to take a lot of information and very creatively put it into charts and graphs and formatting of it. It's having a nice theme throughout to make it look very seamless in how you weave your story as to you being the person that they want to work with.
Do you have suggestions for tools? Say it's a small shop and we're trying to do those kinds of things ourselves without a graphic designer. Do you have suggestions for tools or places to look for images or that kind of, any of those kinds of things to add to your proposal or your slides, like you were just showing us through your PowerPoint?
There's lots of free resources online for help with infographics. Sometimes it's just looking online to get ideas for how to present information in a different format as well. I'm happy to coordinate afterwards and send you some, places to look for interesting resources online if that helps.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. That'd be a nice resource to add to our Business Essentials website for sure. What do you do with multiple RFPs from architects when one of the architects regulates what your percentage is on all the projects?
So I think the person's asking if perhaps their fees regulated by one firm and not the others when you're in a multi-team pursuit.
That's what it sounds like to me, yeah.
Okay. So in that case, I kind of talked about multi-team pursuits on the last call, and I will, kind of go back to what I said on that call on this one in case we don't have an overlap. So in a multi-team pursuit as subconsultants, we have to take every RFP that's given to us by each individual architect as its own pursuit. And what I mean by that is you can't cross-pollinate information. So if architectural team A sends you an RFP and sends you, let's say they have addendums and they send you addendum B, C, and D, and then architectural team B sends you all the pieces and architectural team C sends you, some of the pieces again, you gotta kind of take the information that each individual team sent you and respond to it with that piece of information only. Sometimes when you're in multiple team pursuits, they actually ask for different data in the data call, and that's how they're strategically pursuing it. I mean, I know that we've actually been on multiple team pursuits. Let's say it's for a performing arts center on a higher ed campus. Some people are asking for higher ed information. Some people are asking for performing arts information. Some people are asking for mixed use information. and you have to respond to each of them individually. Now, that question was really regarding a fee. Again, you have to, if you know you're limited in the fee with the one firm, then you have to limit your fee with that firm, but you can't limit your fee with the other firms. You have to go at it with only the knowledge you have that they've sent you.
Okay, let's see. To what extent can we reorganize the flow of our responses to better sell and make sense of how we would approach the project?
So I guess my question to that is that your template that you're using? Because sometimes in proposal responses, you're given the format that you have to use. So in that case, you're kind of limited to how you respond. In your own format and the template that you use, you kind of have to think about how you want to present your firm. You know, do you put your information up front and tell them all about yourself? Or do you put the client's information up front so that you're focusing on the client? It's how you culturally want to represent your firm and how you weave your story through your proposal materials.
Okay, so how do you capture the scope or set the fees when the client, when the client doesn't know what they want?
So I'm guessing this is when the client comes to us and just says something vague. What's a good example? I want to have a corporate cafeteria, and I think it's for my population is 3,000. This is great for, you know, COVID. I had 3,000 at the beginning of COVID. You know, I think we're going to do hybrid, so maybe a third of them will be in at a time, but it's going to be open to the public. What I always say is, you know, base it on your experience and make sure you spell it out in your proposal, what it is, what criteria you base your proposal on. It's not always fair because you could spell it out in your proposal that you're basing it on, based on your experience and the information that they gave you, you know, you're basing it on a 5,000 square foot facility, and my competition could come in and interpret the information completely differently. The client discards all of that and just goes to the fee. I still like to put in all of our proposals that it's based on the programming exercise, and I reserve the right to revisit my fee once we actually determine what it is that you need.
Yeah. How can you distinguish your firm in a way beyond the qualifications? Like, what else can you add to a response that isn't just the tried and true qualifications, CV, those are resume, those kinds of things? What else could a company do? If anything.
What else can set you apart?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's actually having the conversation with the client up front. You know, some people just get if you're allowed to. Some people just get the RFP and respond, and they miss the opportunity to have the conversation with the client up front. And that can actually set you apart because you've actually taken the time to have a conversation with the client and try to understand the need. You know, sometimes it's follow-up after. You know, the content's in, you know, there's so many different ways that you can present yourself and your firm that, you know, sometimes I look at our competition proposals and I'm like, wow, I didn't think to do that. And sometimes it's just, again, having a fresh set of eyes, look at your material, which is why I always suggest if you can do a proposal swap to do it, because really you get so caught in your box that sometimes having somebody out of your box tell you how they perceive that you represented yourself, it gives you a whole new fresh set of ideas on how that you can present yourself and what you've missed.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for how you can find out who else is getting invited to respond?
You can ask. I think it depends on how well you know the client, if it's a public bid opportunity or private. Sometimes you kind of just know who the competition is, just by the geographic area and market segment. I don't have any secrets to that. It just depends on your relationship with the client and what you think you can get out of them and not.
Yeah. So we have one more. Let's do one more. How much time do you spend researching the client's representatives on the interview? So isn't it important to know who is asking the question and why it is important to that particular person specifically?
I like to do research, period. I have a lot of books behind me. So I'm definitely someone that likes to do a lot of research. In fact, I have a degree in history. So research is sort of my thing. So I am definitely one of those people that like to investigate the history and the research and do a deep dive into some of the firms that come to us with proposals and the people when I know they're going to be on the call. It never hurts to have too much information. It definitely looks bad when you don't have enough.
So it really goes back to make sure you're spending a decent amount of time on each of the proposals, knowing who you're talking to, not doing it at the last minute.
No, I definitely don't think waiting to the last minute is in your best idea. And I know there's some people do it because they're too busy working on projects and they wait the last possible second to throw something together. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But is that really putting your best foot forward? And is that really the culture you want to have at your firm, that it's okay to wait to the last minute?
Right.
I kind of forgot to mention in my presentation that the proposal in some cases is your first introduction to the client. Maybe not to the architect that you're presenting to, but maybe to the end user. And you want to make sure that whatever that first introduction is, it's a good one. And if they're going to work with you on a big project, you want to show that you took the time and are thoughtful and feel they are important enough to have put the time into it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, that's about it. That's about all the time we have for this month. So thank you again for this proposal. I've got some comments here saying also thank you, Kathleen, for a great session on this. So we do appreciate it. Just some reminders again, please reach out now if you have questions for Kathleen, and let me know if you'd like to work with her on the proposal swap. I will definitely make sure that we can make that happen for you. Also, just as an FCSI reminder, don't forget that our Business Essentials webinars are on our website for you to review, especially including this one will be up early next week. And remember that the FCSI podcasts are available and appear every Tuesday on our website. And they're also available on YouTube, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, if you just want to listen. And finally, keep an eye out for details about registering for the FCSI the Americas Symposium this August 24th and 25th. We will actually be together in person in Orlando just prior to the NAFM show. We're so looking forward to seeing everybody in person. So just keep an eye out for registration for that event. We're really excited. And that is it for this month. So thank you again, Kathleen. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you soon.